Greetings everyone, I'm RTR and this video is a bit different and I guess requires some context before we actually get into it. Now, if you either some reason know the context or just don't care, there is a nice time code here that can just skip you straight to the actual main portion of the video. Now, for the two of you that have noticed, and for the one of them that has bothered to connect the dots and care, I'm currently living in university at the moment, and I'm coming towards the end of my second year. But during the second year, I had the opportunity to do something quite interesting for one of my optional module projects, which was to create an instructional video. Now, I was allowed to do it on literally anything I want, so I did it on the one thing at the time I'm still kind of obsessed with now. Fucking these things, these horrific things. So I decided to create a how-to guide for someone who has never played Yu-Gi-Oh before and give them like the basic know-how so you could kind of go out there and play for yourself, even though Yu-Gi-Oh is quite complicated nowadays. Now, it's all well and good. I did plan to upload the video to YouTube once it was done. It was made on YouTube and had a nice format and everything like that. I just forgot. I honestly just forgot until I was cleaning out some of my old stuff from my old videos, just deleting them for storage space, and then I realized it was just there. So I was like, oh yeah, forgot about that. I made this back in December, by the way, so it's been about 6-ish months since I worked on that video, so I just thought, I'm not going to throw it out. I kind of would like it to be there, because I was proud of the video, and I did get marked relatively well on it. So it's going to be here its entirety in the original format that it's going to be there. The only thing that isn't going to be included is the Google form that I talk about at the end of the video at some point. That is, I just ended up just losing that. It just doesn't work anymore for some reason. So instead, just let me know how many of the questions you get right in the comments below, and I might make another one, like a better updated one, because A, I recorded it just coming off like a 2-week illness after Christmas. B, I fucked up the audio balancing because of that, because during the editing process I was just drained and did not care in the slightest to that point. So the editing and the audio balance is a bit messed up, and I can't really fix it now because I'm using new editing software. Premiere Pro sucks, by the way. So yeah, here is the entire video of Beginner's Guide on How to Play Yu-Gi-Oh! Greetings everyone, and welcome to a Beginner's Guide on How to Play the Yu-Gi-Oh! Trading card game. Hopefully by the end of this, you should be able to, regardless of any knowledge prior, be able to construct a deck of your own and have a basic understanding of how the game operates. Now, before we jump in, I do have some disclaimers and how this video is going to be structured and formatted. Now, both in the description and on the screen right now are timestamp contents of each segment of the video. This is for either if you're already really aware of some aspects of how the game works, you can just skip right to the parts where you don't know, or if you're returning to this video, you can simply just return to a bit and then refresh yourself a bit. Yeah, you know how a video works and contents work. Right, formatting. As I just mentioned, this video is split up into various different segments. Barring a few of them, at the end of each, I'm going to present like a visual test or quiz, would be the probably best way to describe it, where I will play out a section of a pre-recorded duel or show you an image, and I will give you some information, and then give you an objective to figure out using the knowledge that you have just learned or previously learned in other segments. Now, when you see this icon, the answer will be shown in about 5 seconds of it being on screen, so I recommend that you pause the video and give yourself time to think about it, because believe me, you probably will need time to think about some of the answers to these. Disclaimer: although this game footage you're going to see is going to be from the online browser-based game Dueling Book, just for convenience sake, I'm going to speak and act as if I'm referring to mostly playing the actual physical card game. This is just more for convenience sake, and the fact that this is what I actually want you guys to start playing is the physical card game itself, and it's just an introduction to it. Though it might not make like a different overall in the entire video, as the two games, the physical and Dueling Book, are very similar, I think it's just good to clarify. On a similar note of relevance, I think this is probably better for the long run, but this video will be using the most recent ban list at the time of this recording, which is the September 25th, 2023 ban list. When playing the game for yourself, make sure that you always give the ban list a check to keep yourself up to date with like the card pool and whatnot. Hello, sorry to pause, but quick interjection. Between the filming and editing of this video, Konami did update the ban list, so Even though it affects nothing I've said or any of the cards presented in this video, I would double check if you are trying to build a deck for yourself to just triple check the ban list, just so you know you're up to date. Alright, back to the video. Okay, with that out of the way, we can finally get to the fun part. Basic rules! A game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is typically played as a best of 3 and consists of 2 duelists whose end goal is to reduce the other's health or life points as they're referred to 0 and win the duel. Although there are other ways to win the duel which we'll cover towards the end of the video, this is the primary and most common way of winning. Each player's turn is split up into 6 different phases. The draw phase is self-explanatory, where during this, excluding the first turn of the duel, the turn duelist draws 1 card from the top of their deck. The standby phase precedes this immediately. Here, no input is required of either duelist unless a card explicitly mentions it. On top of that, certain cards such as traps or quick plays and effects can be played here as well. Now here is where we transition into the first main phase, where the turn duelist has the most actions that they can perform, such as summoning a monster, changing positions of pre-existing monsters, setting cards, activating monster, spell or previously set trap effects. Now, if this is the first turn of the duel, the next 2 phases are skipped entirely just for fairness, and we are sent straight to the turn's end. But from turn 2 onwards, we are allowed to go into the battle phase. The battle phase we'll touch on in a bit more intricate detail later because, yeah. But to give a simple version for now, this is the phase where the player's monsters can attack the opponent's monsters to deal damage or attempt to destroy the monsters and deal life point damage to their opponent. Or if their opponent has no monsters, are allowed to attack them directly. After battle, we enter main phase 2, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's literally a second main phase that allows you to do the exact same things as the previous one I've just mentioned. I should also mention that at any point in the turn, you can go from main phase 1 to any phase from that point on apart from main phase 2 for obvious reasons. So you can go from main phase 1 to battle or main phase 1 straight to end. The same applies for the battle phase. You can go from battle to end. You don't have to go into main phase 2 if you don't want to. The end phase is also quite simple. The player's turn ends and the effects that stay until the end of turn resolve. Now I know that there were terms and phrases in that explanation that you might not fully understand yet, and that is completely fine. You'll know what they mean by the end of the video. Now that you've learned the rules and basic format of the structure of the game, let's move on to the tools you're using, the different decks you're playing with in the game, and the different sections of the game area or the game map.
It's time to duel!
Now up to 3 different types of decks are used in a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! The mandatory and most important deck is the main deck, which consists of 40 to 60 monster, spell and trap cards. Each card can be included up to 3 times if it isn't limited or forbidden on the official ban list. Now I would try to aim to as close as possible to 40 cards if you don't have an efficient way to go through your deck at the moment, which if you're just starting you probably don't. If you have 60 cards in your deck, you can have what we like to call as bricking, where the odds of you drawing a hand that is playable goes significantly down if you have less cards in your deck, so you have the opportunity to draw a set of cards you can actually play with and that aren't useless on whatever turn you're playing. Now, back in the very early days of Yu-Gi-Oh! The recommended ratio of cards in deck was 20 monsters, 10 spells, and 10 traps. And while that is massively deviated as times change and metas develop, I don't think it's a bad consideration for if you're ever constructing your first deck. Now, when wanting to construct a deck and potentially looking at archetypes and different deck strategies you like, I'd heavily recommend, and I'll be leaving it in the description below, the website Yu-Gi-Oh! Projects, or YGOPRODECK.com, for inspiration and advice on getting stuff like this. It's where I and a lot of people in the community take different decks, and if you're playing on Dueling Book, you can take decks from there completely over to Dueling Book within like 2 seconds. So I would definitely recommend that is a must check out link in the description below. The extra deck, we'll touch on that in more detail due to the different variety of cards located in there, but for now let's just say it has a limit of 15 cards, and the monsters contained are usually more powerful but have better effects, but require the use of monsters either on the field or in the hand to be able to be summoned. And finally we have the side deck. Side decks are usually more used in competitive formats, Also, up to 15 cards allowed in here, but the deck can only be used in between matches 1 and 2 and 2 and 3 in a best of 3. Here you can swap out main or extra deck cards with ones that are found in your main or extra deck that you're currently using. This is done for multiple reasons, such as changing up your strategy slightly now that your opponent is more familiar with your playstyle and deck. But it is mainly used to counter your opponent when you realise what they're doing in their deck. Let's use this for example. If you notice your opponent likes to play a lot of spell and traps, and perhaps you don't have a way of getting rid of them, you can swap out a high level monster that you didn't think you'd be able to summon in this duel, and swap it out for a card that specifically targets spell and traps to destroy them. Alright, take a look at this. This is your game mat, or duel area, whichever one you want to call it. We'll split it up into 7 different sections and break down what each section means. First, the main monster zone, or as it's referred to, the front row. Here, this is where your main deck monsters and extra deck monsters can be summoned or set. Below it you'll find the second section, the spell and trap zone, or the back row. Similar to the front, but for the spell and trap cards obviously. The far left and the far right you will notice these little red and blue icons. These are called pendulum zones, and we'll talk about those in the extra deck monster segment. In the bottom right is the graveyard, or GY. Now when a card is destroyed or used, if it's a spell and trap, unless stated otherwise, they are sent to the graveyard face up. If a card is face up on the field at any point, it is classed as public knowledge, meaning both players have access to be allowed to read that card and understand what it does. If a card is face down, it means it is not public knowledge and hidden, meaning that only the person whose side of the field it is on is allowed to look at it. Which means, since the graveyard is classed as public knowledge, you are allowed, if you are confused on what your opponent has in their graveyard at any time, you're just allowed to ask them politely, may I look at your graveyard, and they will go yes. Next to the graveyard is where the main deck area is located. This is very self-explanatory. It's where the main deck goes, is placed face down, and the same can be said on the exact opposite side of the map, where the extra deck will go, face down as well. Slightly above the extra deck is a field spell zone. Now this is where special types of spell cards called field spells are placed and when activated or set. Each player can only have one field spell active at a time, and each player only has one field spell slot. If one is activated while you already have one on your side of the field, it is replaced, and the current field spell is sent to the graveyard. Lastly, there is an extra monster zone which you can see sitting at the top. Similar to the front row, the monsters from the extra deck can go in here if you choose, although cards such as Link monsters must go here at the start, which we'll get onto in a bit. Both zones are shared, as you can see there are only 2. Once a player occupies one zone, they can't use the other, as it is mandatory that the other player must use that zone. Alright, I hope you're paying attention because it's time for the first test. On your screen now, there is a screenshot of a deck that I have made, but there are 3 errors within it. Can you spot what they are? The first one is that the main deck only contains 35 cards when the minimum is 40. Next was that I contain 2 cards that are classed as limited to 1 per deck in a deck, which is illegal. And finally, my extra deck contains a card that should not be allowed in there, as it contains a regular monster that goes in the main deck. Alright, now that we know where the cards go, time to learn about the cards themselves.
Doro! Monster card! Doro! Monster card! Doro! Monster card!
First, we'll go over actually how to read a card. I'll be showing a monster card, but this applies to every card, and if you can master this, you're better than like 80% of the player base already. Here is the card Barrel Dragon, which we'll use an example to identify the 6 key features on a card. The name, the attribute which falls into one of 6 typings, the level of the card's typing, the card's description / or effect, and the attack and defense points of the monster. Main deck monster cards are split into 3 different types. The normal, yellow frame monsters that don't do much other than be monsters to summon. The effect orange frame monsters which have various abilities that can be activated either manually or by filling a requirement. Or the ritual blue framed monsters that can only be summoned with a specific spell card called a ritual spell, which we'll get onto a bit later. Now every turn you are to either normal or set only one monster over both main phases. meaning that if you've done it in main phase 1, you're not allowed to do it in main phase 2. Normal summoning means to place the monster on the field in face up attack position, and setting it means to place it in face down defense position. If a turn passes and you have cards that are face down, you're allowed to perform what's called a flip summon. Here is where you switch the monster from face down defense to face up attack. You can flip summon as much as you can on that turn if you want to, but remember that you can only activate the effects of monsters that are face up on the field. All set face down monsters are treated as the same thing, a set card. Now if a card is leveled with the stars between 1 and 4, it means it can just be normal or set onto the field. Now if it is above that star level of 4, the card must be what is known as tribute summoned. Tribute summoning or tribute setting takes up your normal summon for the turn and requires you to get rid of monsters that you have on the field to summon from your hand. If the card is level 5 or 6, it requires 1 tribute, 7 or higher requires 2 tributes. Now some cards you might have noticed, if I've seen the video, mention the phrase special summon. This can be done as many times as you need to per turn or many times as you can, and allows you to place your monster in either face up attack or face up defense. Also, I just thought I'd mention as well, since I don't really have a better place to put this in the video, but if a face down defense position monster is attacked during the battle phase, it is swapped to face up defense instead. It is not flip summoned, it is simply just flipped. Alright, quiz time. See if you can solve this. Okay, in this quiz what we have is 3 monsters on each side of the field. On our side we have 2 in attack, 1 in defense, and in our hand we have 3 monsters of varying different levels. Our opponent is on 2,400 life points, so what we need to do is find a way to tribute a monster on the field and then use other monsters we have on the field to attack and reduce our life points to 0. The correct solution here would be to tribute the defense position monster, since we know our opponent has nothing and has no way of countering, so we can get rid of the defense position monster, tributing for Ally of Justice Colossus, and then attacking with Ally of Justice Colossus and 2-headed King Rex. That will be enough exactly to reduce our opponent's life points to 0. And if you got that right, congratulations! Now it's time to move over to spell and trap cards. Spell and traps come in a variety of different forms and can be identified by looking at the top left next to where it says either spell or trap card and seeing if there are one of these 6 symbols next to it. If there is no symbol next to it, it means the card is just simply a single use and will go to the grave after being played or activated. Equip spells can be attached to a monster to give a positive or negative effect depending on what the card text reads, such as raising or lowering a monster's attack points. Field spells, as mentioned earlier, have their own separate area that are placed into that affect both duelists. Quick play means if the card is in your hand on your turn and your opponent activates a card effect, you can follow up by playing that card. The same can be done if it's set on your opponent's turn, like you're playing a trap card. Ritual cards can be used to summon ritual monsters, as we mentioned earlier, using the required material stayed on the card. Usually it's a card that requires the same star level as the monster you're trying to summon. Continuous spell and traps stay on the field when they're activated unless immediately destroyed. And counter traps are normally used in response to an opponent's action and usually have the effect to negate something that they have done. Please keep in mind that the words negate and destroy are 2 completely different things in Yu-Gi-Oh! If something is activated but then is destroyed, minus continue effects and field spells, the effect still goes off. If something is negated, it doesn't. Okay? With that said, this next quiz is in 2 parts. Can you figure them both out? Okay, in this next quiz, our opponent is in their battle phase. We have 2,200 life points and they have 2,000. The opponent's monster declares an attack. What we use are face down, trap card and mirror force. It says when opponent's monster declares an attack, destroy all opponent's attack position monsters. The opponent, in response to that, chains Mystical Space Typhoon, which says target 1 spell and trap your opponent controls, destroy it. The first question is, once Mystical Space Typhoon destroys Mirror Force, will the attack still go through? So, the resolution happens, Mystical Space Typhoon destroys Mirror Force and is sent to the graveyard for being used, but since Mirror Force was not negated, it is still activated and destroys the opponent's monster. Now for the second part of the quiz, using the cards in our hand and on our field, I would like you to find a way by only doing one attack to reduce our opponent's life points to 0. I'm going through the cards as you can see right now, so all of the ones in the hand will explain what they do. Feel free to pause and take a look and try and figure out the answer. If you figured it out, the answer to this quiz was to equip Horn of the Unicorn to the dragon dwelling in the cave, increasing its attack points by 700, which makes it 2000 exactly, which is enough to go into the battle phase and attack, reducing our opponent's life points to 0. With that said, when your opponent activates a monster effect or spell and trap effect, always make sure that you're not going to waste a card trying to get rid of it when it actually doesn't give anyone any advantage whatsoever. With that said, let's move on to the extra deck. In the extra deck, there are 5 different types of cards that can go into them, so let's take a detailed look at each. Fusion cards can be identified as purple and can only be summoned with the spell card or effect that lists the term Fusion Summon, and must be made out of the required cards either from your field or hand. Synchro monsters are white and require a mixture of different types of cards called tuner monsters. Tuner monsters are the same as regular effect monsters but have the word tuner next to them and usually are typically lower leveled monsters. You can identify if a card is a tuner by in the typing section of the monster card next to the word effect or whatever type the monster is. In order to perform a synchro summon, you need to add the star levels of every tuner and non-tuner monster so that it perfectly adds up to the exact star level of the synchro monster you're trying to summon.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
XZ cards are identified as black and use what we call material. When this is summoned, it usually requires 2 or more cards of the same star level, and when summons, the cards from that card are added underneath the card. I know this is quite hard to think about. If you're having trouble thinking about it, the best way I got it explained to me was think of it like the card is a loaded weapon and the cards that go underneath it are the ammo. So when certain effects or requirements are activated, you can send some material, firing some ammo, from the card to the graveyard in order to fill those requirements or effects.
Yo, this is the funniest shit I've ever seen.
The most recent addition to the extra deck are Link monsters, which are also a different variation of blue, but they mainly preside in the extra deck to variate the difference between that and ritual monsters, and have some very unique rules regarding how they're summoned. All Link monsters have a Link value. Depending on how many monsters are needed to summon it, Link monsters must first be summoned in the extra monster zone, and any additional Link monster summoned while there is already still one on the field must be summoned where the Link arrows point. The many arrows you see surrounding the cards are Link arrows. Some of them that are lit up in red signify which ones are active for the card. Depending on what Link value the card is, depending on how many Link arrows will be active. Example, a Link 2 card will have 2 arrows active. Link monsters also, depending on the Link value, can be used to summon another Link monster as multiple Links. For example, if you're trying to make a Link 3 Link monster, you can use 1 regular monster on the field and 1 Link 2 monster on the field to count as 3 Link monsters.
All I know, time is a valuable thing. Watch it fly by as the pendulum swings.
Finally, pendulums. They are mainly situated in the main deck, but when destroyed are sent to the top face up of the extra deck. On pendulum cards, located near the effect or description are what are called pendulum scales on each side of the card. You can place these in the most left and most right spell and trap zones to perform a pendulum summon, which lets you summon monsters from your hand or face up extra deck whose levels fall between the 2 numbers. Now if you're getting started in Yu-Gi-Oh!, don't play with pendulums. It's not worth it. A lot of people who play Yu-Gi-Oh! Even like professionally nowadays still don't know how pendulums work, because they're not really good at all. So bit of personal advice from me: don't start playing with. You can use all the other extra deck monsters, it's fine. I think they're very nice ways to learn how to play the game, but I don't think pendulums are worth it unless you're really into playing Yu-Gi-Oh at that point. Alright, that might have been a lot to process, but do not feel bad. If you need to, go back and remind yourself before we get into this next quiz. This next quiz requires that you perform a fusion summon, an XZ summon, and a synchro summon all in this turn. The cards we have on our field are the Tuna card, Ash Blossom and Joyous Springs, a fire level 3 monster, Alligator Sword, the normal monster that is level 4 and Earth, Ancient Tool, which is level 5 and Dark, and a normal monster, and finally the normal monster 7 Coloured Fish, which is a water monster and is level 4. For the extra deck, feel free to pause as we go through them so you can read them as I would advise it. We have the fusion card Ambulance Rescue Roid, the fusion card Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, the synchro card Ally of Justice Light Gazer, the synchro card Assault Blackwing Onimaru of the Divine Thunder, the XC's monster Baromet the Sacred Sheep Scrub, and finally Dark Rebellion XYZ Dragon, the XZ card. In our hand, we also have the spell card Polymerization, which reads, fusion summon 1 fusion monster from your extra deck, using monsters from your hand or field as fusion material. That's everything you need. Pause it for a second and see if you can work it out. Okay, here's a solution. The order for the first 2 steps doesn't matter, but as long as you've done them, it's fine. We'll send Ash Blossom, Joyous Spring, and Ancient Tool to summon the level 8 Tuna monster, Ally of Justice, Light Gazer, as both the levels of those monsters add up to 8. Next, we'll overlay and XZ summon our 2 level 4s to summon the rank 4 Dark Rebellion XYZ Dragon. Now, since we control 2 dark monsters, we can use our polymerization to fuse these 2 dark monsters to summon Starving Venom Fusion Dragon. And there we go, we performed all 3 of the required summons in this one turn. If you didn't get the order right or struggling on how this works, rewind the video to the previous section to figure out the ins and outs of all the previous summon videos, then come back and see if you can figure it out without the explanation video. Okay. Now it's time for the... Look, I'm mostly joking around when it comes to the battle phase. It's just that it usually gives the most people the most confusion when talking about it. Hell, even I still struggle with it. But it's mainly because the battle phase is broken up into 4 different steps, which are start, battle, damage, and end steps. Now to begin, you actually don't need monsters to enter the battle phase. Actually, some cards do prefer that you don't. And if your main phase 1 is skipped for whatever reason, you can choose to go straight to the battle phase or just straight to main phase 2 from there. Right, you got that? Let's just break down all those steps then. Now the start step is simply a duelist declaring they are entering the battle phase. So effects like anti-magic arrows, which state can be started at the start of the battle phase, can be triggered, and also once passed then requires, same for the end step, which is very similar, requires the player to announce that they are going out of the battle phase, so effects that require stuff at the end of the battle phase can trigger then. The battle step is when attacks are declared, not attacking, declared. If an attack is declared, we enter a small window opportunity for the opponent and then the turn player to activate any effects. If any card or effect or any play made results in a monster is on the any side of the field being either removed from play or any new monsters are added to the field at any point during this window, the attacking player may choose to either call off the attack or redeclare it to either the same target or another target on the field. Or if the opponent somehow doesn't have any monsters on the field after this small window, you are to redeclare the attack at the opponent themselves. After this, we enter a window called Before the Damage Step, which the exact same logic applies to the previous window, but cards have the ability to cancel the battle entirely or completely removed and are unable to be used. Now the damage step is a bit more complicated, but it's when the attack itself takes place. And it is broken down into 5 separate timing windows. Like, you're starting to see why this is complicated and why a lot of us hate this. The start of the damage step is simply the declaration of the actual attack. The next is a period before damage calculation, and it's where any set attack monsters are flipped face up and any immediate effects are activated accordingly. The damage calculation itself is the attack going through, and any life point damage is calculated and dealt to the appropriate player. After damage calculation is for cards that list the window after damage calculation to activate or any requirements to be triggered, such as flip effects. And finally, the end of the damage step, any destroyed monster is sent to the grave. Okay, here are all the monster combinations, and here what happens when you're attacking. An attack on attack monster means that the lower attack is destroyed and sent to the grave. An attack on defense means that if the attack is higher than defense, the defense monster is destroyed and no damage is taken to the player unless the term piercing is applied. If the defense is higher than the attacking player takes the damage of the difference, but no cards are destroyed. If you attack a monster in attack position that has the exact same attack points as the attack monster you're using, and there's a lot of attack in there, both monsters are destroyed. If you do the exact same thing, but both monsters are 0 attack points, neither monster is destroyed and no damage is taken to either player. Okay, like I said, feel free to go and revisit that section. I know it is a lot to take in, but it's time for the final quiz. This one can either be really easy or really hard if you weren't paying attention. On our field we have 2 monsters, both level 4, both with 1000 and 2000 attack, and for the sake of the quiz, we know that our opponent's set monster has a flip effect. When we go into battle and declare with the normal monster to attack, at what stage does the flip effects monster's flip effect activate? The correct answer is after damage calculation. When a monster attacks, the damage has gone through, which if it's a defense position monster, no damage is taken to the opponent, but before the monster is destroyed and sent to the graveyard, its effect activates, which is to destroy all level 4 monsters your opponent controls. So both of our monsters are sent to the grave. Alright, now before we wrap up, I'm going to quick fire through some terms and phrases that I couldn't really fit elsewhere in this video because they're kind of unofficial or they didn't really fit anywhere else. So we'll begin with... Chaining means to apply an effect on top of a previously activated effect. This can be done as many times as needed, and once both players agree that the chain is over, the cards resolve in the reverse order that way they were activated. A previous example of this is in one of the quizzes previously mentioned, where Mirror Force is first activated, which would be classed as Chain Link 1, then Mystical Space Typhoon was activated, which would then be classed as Chain Link 2. The Chain Link resolves, and Mystical Space Typhoon activates first, which destroys the Mirror Force, and then Mirror Force activates Chain Link 1, which destroys our opponent's monster. Reducing your opponent's life isn't the only way to win a duel, as I've mentioned previously. Some cards have the effect of winning a game just by its card's effect, such as Exodia the Forbidden One, or Final Countdown. Another way to make your opponent lose is to make them enter the draw phase when they have no cards in their deck, which will cause them to proceed what is called a deck out, and will automatically reduce all their life points to 0 regardless of how many they have. If you're familiar with how just card games work in general, you might already know what milling is, but it's a general term used for sending cards from the deck elsewhere. In this game, it's usually to the graveyard or the banish zone. Now this might seem very self-explanatory, and it kind of is, but it just literally means if you add a card from your deck to your hand, and I'm also going to use this time to explain that if you ever add a card from your deck to your hand or summon a monster from your deck must be shuffled before the game continues. Now, here's some personal recommendations for me. If you're playing physically, it's always good to have these on hand. A coin or a dice for cards that have counters, or deciding the turn order at the beginning of the game. A calculator or phone with a calculator on it for obvious reasons, just for help with numbers and damage calculation. And card sleeves are helped to protect your cards both in and out of Duel, and for professional play are required to have your entire deck and extra deck and side deck all sleeved up. There are three main methods to deciding who goes first in a duel. The first is flipping a coin and calling it right. The second is high rolling dice. And third is by winning a game of rock, paper, scissors. Now whoever wins any of these gets to decide whether they want to go first or second. Hand traps is an unofficial term coined by having a monster effect that is activated from the hand, usually in the response to an opponent's actions. And in all cases but one, these are not actual trap cards. And yeah, that's the end. I truly hope that you can take what you've learned from this video and start playing from yourself now you know the very basics understandings. Now, please do not be afraid if you don't get it on your first go. I didn't. A lot of people don't. This is a big game with over 10,000 cards in its pool. Even big tournament winners struggle from every now and then. And the video won't be going anywhere, so feel free to hop back in and refresh yourself on certain segments that you're just not familiar with or may have forgotten or struggling with. If you feel like you need to see a more long-term visual demonstration, in the description there will be a link to a unlisted duel that me and my friend did, just with some very fun casual decks, just to show you one average game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Would look like uninterrupted, and there is no sound apart from some music in the background. It's just some uninterrupted duel just for you to watch and then see how things play out. If you want to make any feedback for this video, make sure to either leave it in the comments below, or also in the description is located is a Google form that allows you to fill it out and then see what you can do if I ever want to update this in the future, if the rules ever drastically change, or if I want to perform this for another type of game. And with all that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you later.